The healthcare spend in Saudi, I would say, is probably closer to 65 billion. So the migration is going from a market that's, I would say, around 80% public today, 20% private, and most of the private is really private hospital groups. So when you go into standalone private clinics that are specialized and so forth, that's a very small part of the market today. Now, driven by Vision 2030, a huge amount of soft infrastructure was put in place, I would say, around 4 or 5 years ago now. Those cover everything from ownership laws to healthcare ownership laws to contract laws to arbitration laws. So they really turned what is a very interesting market into a very investable market. And that's kind of a huge first step. And that was coupled with a clear vision to turn the market from being primarily public driven to a private led market.
Welcome to Analyzing Healthcare podcast, brought to you by Scale Community. Scale Community is a global healthcare-focused member network where healthcare leaders come to connect, learn, share ideas, and shape what's next in our evolving healthcare landscape. To take advantage of all that Scale Community has to offer, from expansive content to virtual and in-person events, to interactive peer networking opportunities, and more, check out Scale Community at www.scale-community.com. Membership options range from free to paid, so if you enjoy today's discussion, please take a moment to sign up for your preferred membership level. Okay, I'm joined today by Youssef Haidar. Am I pronouncing that remotely correctly?
Quite close. Haidar.
Haidar. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Youssef. It's an honor and a privilege to host you today. I'm very excited for our conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with a little bit of background on you personally, but also if you can weave in the story of Nexus Gulf and the role that you play in healthcare in the Middle East, which is a fascinating topic. Can't wait to dive into it.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks a lot for having me, Roy. It's a real pleasure, and I'm very glad to be on the podcast today. I come from the investment space. I've been investing in healthcare for most of the last 25 years, mostly in the Middle East region and predominantly in Saudi and the UAE. Those are my core markets. So I've had the opportunity over the last 17 years or so to be a founding investor in multiple platforms that grew in their respective markets and got exited across the region. Nexus Gulf is a group I founded around 5 years ago now. It's an investment platform that focuses on healthcare services in Saudi Arabia to play a role really in the enablement of what I believe to be one of the most fascinating transformation stories happening in healthcare services globally today. We are part of Safanad Group. Safanad Group is a global investment group that has deployed around $10.5 billion in the US, Europe, and the region. Focuses on healthcare, education, digital infrastructure, and real estate. So that's kind of the umbrella that kind of sits around us, and our focus is Saudi.
Okay, so let's frame what's going on that's so exciting, because as those who know me, anytime that there's a revolution going on in healthcare, my ears pick up. I get very excited. I love change in healthcare. I can't even explain why. But in Saudi Arabia, just to frame it, the stats that I have are, and correct any of this, 35 to 40 million population. So I think of it as sort of a Texas, a California-sized population in the Middle East, but probably with a lot more access to resources, just an incredibly affluent country, but not necessarily the largest population. And then when I think about what is there today versus what was there versus what's there today and where are we heading, maybe what was there was purely government-funded, government-administered healthcare that has migrated towards a mix, a public-private partnership mix, maybe still majority government, minority private, but what is rapidly moving towards potentially majority private and minority public-administered healthcare. And that really is the essence of the revolution happening before our eyes. And just the scale of the government might have been, I had 280 public hospitals, 1,400 primary health centers, but the budget was, the research I did, it may be off, $50 billion spent, which on a per capita basis is not a lot, at least compared to the US, where we're spending 10 times that amount on a per capita basis. We're spending $10,000 per individual across many states. So there seems to be a desire to spend more on healthcare, but where is that more coming from? Best answer, probably the private sector, investment by the private sector. Am I framing the revolution in Saudi, we'll get to UAE in a second, correctly, or would you frame it differently?
No, I think, listen, well, first of all, you're incredibly well informed. So that's your numbers are very, very close to reality. I think if I'm
The
going to give,
joys of ChatGPT. We're in a new age.
yeah.
50 hours of research condensed to 10 minutes.
No, but I'll give you a bit of probably a different angle when you look at it from this region. So yes, I think the healthcare spend in Saudi, I would say, is probably closer to 65 billion. What is unique about, and you're absolutely right. So the migration is going from a market that's, I would say, around 80% public today, 20% private, and most of the private is really private hospital groups. So when you go into standalone private clinics that are specialized and so forth, that's a very small part of the market today. Now, driven by Vision 2030, a huge amount of soft infrastructure was put in place, I would say, around 4 or 5 years ago now. Those cover everything from ownership laws to healthcare ownership laws to contract laws to arbitration laws. So they really turned what is a very interesting market into a very investable market. And that's kind of a huge first step in kind of the market development, I would say, from the investor standpoint. And that was coupled with a clear vision to turn, as you rightly pointed out, the market from being primarily public driven to a private-led market. Why is that a revolution? I think, and maybe to add to what you said, and you rightly pointed out, the way this transition is happening is through PPPs, and there's a PPP law, and we won the first PPP that happened in the market. We can probably speak to that a bit later in the podcast, but they've enabled that through putting regulations in place. They are transitioning from a system that has service provider, regulator, and payer in one into a standalone payer, regulator, and service provider. That's kind of 80% of the way there. And they're kind of inviting the private market to kind of develop their own entities and kind of grow the market. That's a revolution because it is probably one of the most unique opportunities today to build very sizable businesses in an affluent country that has the ability to reimburse at the right levels, that has the desire to have the best quality of service, localized, and that has the strategy of enabling that through big transition of what is a public health system, right? Which is, as you would expect, an efficient but very well staffed and very well equipped, into the private market. So just a case in point, we entered into diagnostic imaging literally 2 years ago through a PPP. And we are already today the largest diagnostic imaging business in the entire region. So that is, when you look at it from that standpoint, the people who are going to be occupying space in specific sectors in healthcare are going to build enterprises that are going to be the largest in that space probably for decades to come. And that's kind of the transition that's quite interesting. And that's what we're trying to play our role in enabling.
It feels to me, and I wasn't there, so I'm guessing, but there's almost a point of inflection where a Saudi Arabian representative looked at the globe, looked at different markets, looked at Europe, where the only country that I know of that is majority private and minority public is Switzerland. The rest are all majority public, government-funded healthcare, typically 80% plus. They did peak maybe in countries like the UK at 95%, although the UK has regressed down to 85% now. These are rough estimates. Germany has hovered around 80%, so they sort of oscillated or gravitated around this 80% threshold. The rest be private insurance funded. And then, how much was outsourced to the private sector is also up for debate. But just prima facie, on the face of it, what does this market look like? Europe holistically looks like a majority public funded healthcare model, somewhat homogeneous in that respect. And then your representatives looked at the US model and said, that's a different model, at least 50% private funded, private administered. And when you think about the fact that Medicare and Medicaid don't employ a single clinician, it's really only the VA that employs clinicians, and 450,000 of them. But what you're left with is, while the government might pay for half of healthcare in the US, 2 to 2.5 trillion of a 5 trillion spend, actually they're paying for private entities to employ and administer healthcare in large amounts. We then break down into non-profit versus for-profit hospitals, but in my mind, and increasingly across the US, there's very little difference between non-profit and for-profit hospitals. I still consider non-profits as part of the private sector, very much so. For me, public is government funded and government administered. So your group looked at the US model and said, I prefer that. I'm going to go with private insurance, private pay, private entities. Was there this inflection point where you looked at different global models and said, I'd like A versus B or B versus A? And what led to that decision? I can suspect what led to that decision. My suspicion will be there's no real supply in Europe. There's a shortage everywhere of everything. And do we really want to replicate a 10 million population out of 60 million total waiting list for care?
Yeah.
Again, it comes back to this question of supply. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think just to maybe clarify one nuance, and I'll tell you how I think how the government's looking at it. I think the nuance is moving the market into a private market is predominantly is going to be more on the administration and the service provision of healthcare. I think in the end, the government will still probably pay at least half of the bill, and I think that's
I would agree with you.
Yeah, that's probably a natural thing. But the difference is instead of paying salaries for clinicians to do the service in public hospitals and then people walk in and get a free service, that's moving into a national payer that's working based on code, and that's ultimately making sure like ICD-9 and ICD-10 codes and so forth, and making sure the payment is transparent, is efficient, and it's ultimately ensuring that the best service is provided. So the transition that is happening is moving from paying a big budget for a lot of people to do a service towards a payer that's holding you accountable on performance-based contracts and at some point in time value-based healthcare and so forth. And that's a very healthy transition. Now, once that transition happens, I think the ultimate budget allocation, and which is effectively the ultimate payer, will probably most likely stay to be majority the government as well. I think that's kind of a natural development in any market, particularly in the Gulf market, where the local population has really generous healthcare benefits to a large degree. So that's not going to change. But that transition is going to create an efficient market. It's going to open up the ability to create the right incentives across the value chain, is going to move people out of hospitals into standalone centers with volume-based competency, is going to introduce clinical practices and so forth. And it's going to create an efficient and well-developed market. I think that's I think it may be useful to just clarify that nuance. I think that's the end game. I think the other thing I would add to that is, and maybe the analogy, maybe not entirely relevant, but a good analogy is like China with electric cars, right? They never did any cars, and then suddenly they said, okay, well, we will be the best people in electric cars. Saudi has a similar vision. The vision is they want to be leaders in this space, not at a local level, at a global level. The ambition is not we want to solve a problem. It is we want to localize services, we want to localize technology. We'll open our markets for everyone to come in, but do it here, develop our capabilities, and let us be global players. And that ambition is something we find very exciting. Our shareholders are Saudis. Yeah, they invested globally for many years, and when they felt that the time is right, they want to contribute into the local economy. And that to me is really a fascinating development. They have the means, unlike other. I mean, I've invested in a lot of emerging markets. Saudi has a lot of local talent, is very well equipped, has the financial resources. Okay, so fine, 35 to 40 million, that's not a huge number, but that's a very sizable healthcare market that is really moving from public to private in a very short space of time and enabling billion-dollar revenue businesses in a short space of time.
I think when you frame it that way, it stops being that important, the size of the population.
Yeah.
40 million is nothing to sneeze at, but that's not the main appeal.
Exactly.
I think when you frame it as a push towards leadership, you enter a whole new sphere of discussion.
Absolutely.
And a fascinating one, because it's one thing to replicate a US model of 50% public, 50% private. It's another thing to move even further than that model and introduce concepts that the US hasn't really developed that well at all. Now you're in a whole new stratosphere. I can tell you that the US market has benefited and has suffered from its own success. And its success is measured in centuries, the last 2 centuries of developing its healthcare industry with local city-funded hospitals and then independent physician practices, your local primary care provider, right, across the street, and has gone through many machinations. Why am I the Medicare revolution of 1960s, the introduction of PPMs in the 1990s. There's been the Meaningful Use Act of 2013, 2014. There's all these key milestone events that we've lived through over many generations. And to some extent, it does take time to build a wonderful healthcare industry. And you don't have the luxury of centuries to work with. Saudi Arabia is moving quickly to increase investment in its people. And to some extent, that's a little bit of a catch up, right? I want to invest at appropriate levels, and I think I can, and I think I should. But what the US model hasn't done very well is spend time thinking about globalizing its healthcare industry, replicating and expanding what it has in other countries. It's not something that's commonplace. And so the fact that you're already, just like you mentioned the electric vehicle model in China, from day one, you're thinking in that context. Who can we work with globally? Who can we partner with globally? What can we bring to foreign markets, not just our own market? I think to some extent is an advantage, sort of a clean slate, starting in a place that's going to lead to wonderful outcomes. So it's just wonderful to hear you say that. And that already tells me and tells my audience here in the US that we could be learning from you in terms of what it means. So let me focus on that. And please feel free to chime in. But yeah, I'm curious for some of these examples of some of these foreign partnerships. But go on.
Yes. I just want to add one thing, because you said the healthcare hasn't globalized yet in more developed markets. My quick take on that is that it is going to happen. And the reasons are simple, and I can already see it in our discussions. I think the reason is healthcare spend, the growth in healthcare spend per capita is far higher than the GDP growth per capita in all developed healthcare markets. And it's a natural development simply because you have aging populations and big economies that grow a bit slower. And that is a natural development that results in government squeezing budgets year on year. I speak to CEOs of global healthcare institutions, including our partners, and it's always about doing less with more, tighter budgets, which has benefits. It's scale, it's volume-based competency again, but it's getting, it gets tight. If you look at our part of the world, it's the exact opposite. Healthcare spend per capita is not growing very fast because it's a very young population. GDP growth per capita is very high. So there is a very clear reason for healthcare to globalize. In the past, all my interesting discussions were with private equity-led groups in healthcare because they have motivations to create alpha and so forth. I increasingly see non-for-profit institutions in the US, large groups and elsewhere, that suddenly are thinking, let's be entrepreneurs and let's grow. So I just wanted to just add this to what you said. I do think healthcare will globalize, driven by those types of dynamics and the ability to move those systems into new markets and grow them and benefit from that different dynamic is very clear. So I think ultimately it will happen. Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to add that.
No, I agree with you 100%. And I think different countries, this is where it gets very interesting. Different countries will move at different speeds in that process, depending on their receptiveness to foreign collaboration.
Yes.
Whether it's outward facing or inward receiving. So export driven, import driven, based on their receptiveness to progress and change. And that's a big sentence in healthcare. I'll give you a perfect example. I think that your adoption of telehealth, virtual health is good, right? Saudi Arabia seems to be adopting a lot of telehealth usage, especially to get to rural citizens, right? Remote locations.
Correct.
We currently in the US are in a strange quagmire where our telehealth medicine is not Medicare approved. So the whole concept is illegal as far as the federal government is concerned, because we've been renewing approval for this on a recurring basis. And given that our government is 36 days shut, this renewal vote has been delayed. So stuff like that doesn't help. And I think different countries are going to run into this idiosyncrasy quagmire of local regulations that make it very difficult for them to keep pace with other countries. The UK is a perfect example. Just got back from London, met with 10 UK CEOs of 10 different provider groups, behavioral health, orthopedics, physical therapy. Every one of them described their heavy 80% reliance on the NHS as being incredibly inefficient. And nothing moves at a moderate pace. Everything is measured in years. Every agreement, every contract, every
I hear the
strategic
same.
partnership referral agreement, these things take decades. And so that's going to slow you down in Saudi Arabia as you expand. And so what you might do is skip England and go
Yes,
somewhere else. And so what ends up happening is I think you're going to have a two-tiered system of countries that are truly global in healthcare. And then
yes,
you'll have everyone else that will try to benefit from those companies that emerge out
yeah,
of that. And some will and some won't. So it's very interesting to follow it. Let's talk about partnerships with US companies, but let's also talk about Saudi Arabian companies that are getting strong enough that they're seeking outwards. I want to do both. I don't want to just assume that it's overseas companies that are going to migrate into Saudi Arabia, because I think we're going to find it very quickly that it's two directional. So some of
absolutely.
the companies that have moved into Saudi Arabia that I know of are Cleveland Clinic, who partnered with the King Faisal Specialist Hospital,
Yes.
Mass General Brigham, who partnered with Health Holding Company, and McLaren Health came up, who partnered with Western Medical Holding. McLaren I found particularly interesting in that they built a specialized hematology and oncology hospital in Riyadh. Are those three of many examples, or are we
Yeah.
still waiting on large quantities to develop over time?
No, I think some of the
And I
examples you
know
mentioned.
you mentioned Cerba Diagnostics as well, which is a French company,
Yeah,
right? And
correct.
very large
Yeah.
French diagnostics business, very global. But go on.
So I'll just, in terms of the actual traffic that does exist, yeah, Mass General Brigham signed an MOU, as you rightly point out, with healthcare holding companies, same for Cleveland Clinic, and I can tell you the ambition of the authorities is to bring a lot of this capability into the country. So a lot more will happen, a lot more is in the works, a lot more MOUs have been signed, and it's kind of a process that's ultimately happening. From our end, we have a partnership with Alliance Medical in the UK and King Faisal Specialist Hospital. So one of our platforms, which is called التخصصي Alliance Medical, which today is the largest diagnostic imaging business. To your earlier point, we have developed in that technology and capability that is way ahead of what exists anywhere in the world today. So we have what, by GE's own admission, the best command and control center globally. So we took a platform out of GE, capabilities out of Alliance Medical, and within a year, we grew the business to close to 1 million scans a year in its first year of operation. And our command and control center, and I would love to invite you there if you're in Riyadh at some point, is really like out of a
I'm coming.
Star.
I'm going to post a picture of me there.
Yeah, good. And you have to go there. It's really out of Star Wars. You would see like literally people sitting on big screens and a huge screen in front that shows every single move of every single patient and every single piece of equipment in real time. So if somebody's sitting in a room for more than 7 minutes, it will go red. Somebody will pick up the phone and say, "Why is this patient hasn't moved through?" It is incredibly ahead of its time. Our team in Saudi has developed codes around GE's own solution, which GE today is in discussion with us to try to think of taking into new countries. And so it's, to your point, it's about localizing, but then developing on top of that. Another one of our partnership is with Cerba, as you rightly pointed out, it's the reference lab of reference labs of Europe. Our discussions, and there are partners in Saudi, and our discussions with the government are always centered around building a local innovation culture, ensuring that every single new test that gets released in Europe or anywhere in the world gets released in Saudi at the same time, with clinical research organizations supporting that locally. So it is about taking what is best out there and really trying to work and develop it further. When you talked about the evolution of healthcare in the US, and it went through many stages, when they start in Saudi and we go from a public healthcare system that pays salary into directly jumping into value-based healthcare as a mission and a vision in the span of a few years, you can clearly see how many steps they're kind of already jumping and saying, well, we're going to get the best the best type of healthcare system in a few years. And that's really, I guess, in some ways, the benefit of really starting with a blank slate with a lot of resources and having the ambition to be the best. You could really kind of jump through a lot of hoops and build it there.
I think it's a fascinating journey. It's one thing to have a proven drug based on efficacy, based on results. It's one thing to have a proven medical device based on cost, based on quality, outcome. It's another thing to have a proven healthcare delivery model.
Yeah,
You know,
so true.
hospitals look great because they come with big shiny buildings, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the right model for the given problem set. And they run into trouble all the time. Too much primary care, too little primary care. Too much footprint, too little footprint. Too much inpatient, too many beds, too few beds. And so what is the optimal delivery model is a question that remains. And I think one of the things that makes our business so fascinating, one of my questions to you is, as you form these partnerships, it's easy to be drawn to the largest brands, size, almost like large animals, only noticing other large animals. But do you think about who you partner with also based on performance?
Absolutely.
Because I can tell you that there's a lot going on in our market, which is the market that I know best, obviously, because this is where I live. This is what I study the most. The US market at the mid cap, small cap, we'll leave micro alone for a second. We'll ignore venture. But at small to mid, because of healthcare being what it is, you get thousands of companies that are doing 10 million up to $1.5 billion of revenue. Thousands and thousands.
Yeah.
Of them, about 1.5 to 2,500 are truly leading in their given fields. Quite a large pool. None of them are hospitals. None of them have inpatient beds. They're all outpatient. They're all ambulatory. But what they do very well. They tend to be quite specialized, single specialty, maybe dual specialty. And they tend to go through this journey of state to multi-state to national, which is a difficult thing to do. Many fail in trying to do that. Every state here in America, I think of states in America as almost countries, almost. So you can think of it as going multinational. If you're in California and you're trying to succeed in Florida, that's 5.5 hours flight away, 3,000+ miles away. That's not so easy to do logistically.
Absolutely.
Nor regulatorily. Different regulation set. Nor culturally. It's not exactly the same as, from Belgium to Spain, but it's not that different. So as you think about who you're going to partner with, do you leave room in your mind for a leader in outpatient oncology, a leader in outpatient cardiology? Are those spheres that you're looking for as well? And then my next question is, how do we create those bridges for you so you can speak to these groups? Because I know that they are very curious about foreign market expansion. We recently had 2 CEOs of 2 large MSOs, Hopco as an example in orthopedics, that have expanded into the UK through a partnership with the NHS and into Australia. So these groups that are reaching a certain critical mass are now curious to expand overseas. How does that happen for the Middle East? Do they give you a phone call?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Actually, we go out searching for them in many ways, and I'm so happy for us to be having this discussion because you might make that job much easier. But let me just try to frame a bit how we view the relationship. What do we do? What do we expect them to do? And by extension, who is the ideal partner and why?
This is what they want. This is what they want to hear. They don't want to waste your time or theirs. So, what is a good partner?
Absolutely.
What's a bad partner?
Perfect. So, I think when we think of the actual kind of partnership or marriage, what we expect or what we look for, is to say we need a partner that has clinical excellence at the heart of what they do. We see healthcare provision as a universal service. Human beings are biologically similar anywhere in the world. People who provide excellent clinical service based on experience, based on, I think scale matters, but it does not need to be a hospital and does not need to be absolutely massive simply because scale teaches you and you kind of grow expertise and so forth. But clinical excellence is what we expect. Now, having said that, healthcare service provision is a universal matter. Building healthcare service businesses in local economies is 100% a local matter. And this is really the role we ultimately take upon ourselves. If you think of revenue cycle management, if you think of payer systems, stakeholder management, building local capable teams, patient journeys, the payer system, and the right type of incentives it creates. I mean, this is a hugely at heart a local business. And as investors who specialize in investing in healthcare and have developed many such businesses over time, we have learned through the course of doing it, and we've had our scars and we've done right things, hopefully more times than other, but we've learned how to build businesses. So the actual marriage at the end of the day is at heart a clinical team that's able to provide a really good service, and we are the commercial wrapper around it that ultimately enables it to succeed in that specific local market with all the nuances that come with it. Now, that's kind of the relationship that we look for. So by extension, the type of partner we're looking for is a partner that is highly capable of providing that clinical service, and they would always take the lead in it. They would need to have a certain level of scale, certainly not a hospital, despite the fact that hospitals have great names and so forth. But as you rightly pointed out, there's other limitations. It's not that we wouldn't work with them, but we see some of the challenges there. Not-for-profit systems that are quite big have great brands, but not necessarily all the time the right incentives and structures, decision-making capability, and so forth.
Focus is hard for them.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately,
Because
global
they
market development
right.
is like 2 to 3 guys that sit in an international department that are trying to take on the global markets. And I'm not saying that there's nothing to be done there. And I have to say, a lot of them have kind of developed over time to take more of an entrepreneurial. I say this out of experience. I speak to them, and now I can speak to groups that say, we'll invest and we'll do this, something that would have never actually been heard many years ago. But I think ultimately the best partners we have found in terms of speed of execution and abilities are usually mid-scale, I would say, $1 billion plus revenue businesses or thereabouts, or a little bit less or a little bit more. But mostly private equity owned, I find, are always the best type of discussion to have. If I think of Cerba is owned by EQT, a very big private equity fund. If I look at Alliance Medical, they're owned by Icon, a very large private equity fund. Those types of relationships, there's the urgency, there's the need to create value, or founder-led organizations built by highly entrepreneurial founders that ultimately want to grow. Those we find really accessible, able, nimble to move, entrepreneurial and doing things, and experts in their field. We have done, and sorry, go ahead.
So I would create a list here for our audience. Leaders in your space, probably for profit, probably not leadership. You're not a leader by accident. You're a leader in your space because you make leadership decisions. And so it's almost like cooking. If you show up with a non-profit hospital, they want to lead too, but they're going to cook for a very long time because their entire relationship to time is different. Things can unfold over decades. It's okay. We'll still be here.
And incentives and risk appetite are not necessarily always
right.
aligned.
Less risk.
Their tendency is
less risk, please. Not so interested in the upside. I love the vision. Let's take our time getting there. I'm saying to you, Youssef, I'm playing. I'm acting here. I'm role playing with you. Okay, leader, private equity backed, but now the leadership has changed hands a few times. The private equity group has changed a few times, and the love and the connection for how we got here in leadership may have weakened a little bit. And now everything on the cooking is too fast. You're burning the eggs. It's too hot. You're saying, slow down. Now let's take our time. Let's build this right. By the way, this is going to take a lot of investment from you, orthopedic group coming out of America. Are you willing to invest many millions of dollars to build what we need to build here? Are you willing to measure the progress of just the investment, let alone the return on the investment? This is going to take 5-10 years. Are you okay with that? And they're saying, no, we need success right now. Or a public company that needs quarterly earnings right now. Wrong ownership. And then you've got this happy middle where you've got the leadership, you've got the for-profit, but it's not, Rome is not burning. They don't need results tomorrow. They're happy to walk with you on a multi-year growth initiative that's complicated and might underwhelm, might exceed. It's speculative. We're charting new territory. It feels like that's the group for you that you like to work with. Am I right?
Absolutely. I would also add that in most of, and I've had clinical partnerships in 8 healthcare groups in the region that we've grown in the past. I've kind of worked through many iterations of CEOs and ownerships. It's very usual for us, and the 2 examples I just gave, Alliance Medical and Cerba, both of them changed hands halfway through our program. You know, Servo was sold by Partners Group to EQT. Icon was sold, by, it was bought it from Life, bought Alliance from Life. It's fine. I think that's also fine, and you can still work with that. But that's the happy middle, absolutely. And that kind of, because I think it would be a big mistake, and I say this all.
Succession is everything in a big business. The best
Yes,
analogy I can use is football, soccer.
yeah,
You go
yeah.
from a great coach, you either get another great coach with good ownership, or everything falls apart and you
Yeah.
become Man United.
But yeah, exactly.
But keep going. I interrupted you, Youssef.
No,
Keep
no,
going.
I need to. I forgot my train of thought, but
You're saying that you were saying that Alliance Medical, there was change of ownership, and you were comfortable with the change of ownership. It
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
didn't you didn't
And
see a
look,
drop
actually,
off.
no, no, no. I think, I mean, there were situations where you sit in the room again and have a discussion, and the when it's private equity led and it's kind of moving between PE to PE shop, usually the incentives are aligned. And if you look at case studies of groups that have owned businesses in our part, like look at Davita and Diavarium and others. I mean, just the fact that they're in a market contracting and winning big contracts, it gives them one or two or three turns on their EBITDA when they come to exit. So it's meaningful. Sorry, what I wanted to say is the attitude and the approach, I think, is quite important, because understanding that Saudi is not an opportunistic tactical, I'll send a few people, check the market and see what happens out of it. It's really a market that can change the value and the potential of a lot of those businesses. $1 billion business, you could build $1 billion business in your area of expertise in Saudi in a few years if you're really focused and you have your eye on the ball. I mean, we're already doing this, and we've done this in the past. So I think appreciating the opportunity for what it really is, which is not a tactical, opportunistic play, but a market development, building local equity, which you can only do if you're serious about providing real healthcare benefits to the local population, and doing well and doing good in the process. To me, is also quite an important variable. This is by no means an opportunistic play. It's real value that you create to yourself as an enterprise, and more importantly, as far as we see it, you do to the actual patients and the local population.
My last question for you, and this has been exceeding my expectations. I think this is such an important conversation on so many levels, and I think really the taste of things to come for all of us. One of the areas that we should all, as a global population, be incredibly excited about is real collaboration at this level. We've seen philanthropic global collaboration. We've seen life science global collaboration. We are at the first inning of the first inning of global healthcare delivery collaboration, which I'm really excited about because I see us going to the second inning. I see the progress. And it's
Yeah.
guys like you that are making it happen. So it's just
Thank
wonderful
you
to
very
speak to
much.
you. But my last question before I allow you to get off the hook here is, okay, so you're a foreign operator and Youssef gives you a call, come help us. And you say, great, all the Middle East, every country, 3 countries, 1 country at a time. Which country am I picking first and why? What's your
Yeah,
answer?
that's a great question. And just to kind
I
of,
thought I would squeeze in one good question during this
yeah, no, that's
conversation.
a brilliant question. And the Middle East is a very broad term, and I wouldn't really, it's probably not the right word to describe the market, because it kind of, there's very little in common from a business perspective beyond cultural matters and so forth. To us, the Gulf is one market, and that market is less scale payer, higher payer capability, huge global ambitions driven by resources and so forth. You've got North Africa, which is big scale in terms of number, lower
So now
reimbursement
we're
capability.
talking Egypt with over 100
Yeah,
million population.
exactly. So you need to kind of cluster it to look at it simply, and one cluster that looks and feels the same. And our focus is the Gulf, and Saudi Arabia is over 60% of the Gulf by any measure, and it is the one market that's in the midst of the most interesting transitions. Other markets have had their transitions. The UAE embarked on this journey around 15 years ago, and we played a big part in that, and we invested in companies and did quite well for the local economy and for ourselves and for the local community. Today, the big transformation is happening in the biggest market of the entire region, which is Saudi Arabia, and I would say that's enough for us to stay busy for a good 10 years. You grow out of Saudi and you can still do a lot of other things, but we can be busy in that market for a good 5 to 10 years. And I think it'll be worth our time.
So Saudi first, Gulf second, and then the world.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, I love it.
That's
Youssef,
a good way to put it.
hopefully you had a good time. I loved it. Thank you. And look forward
I
very
love
much
the
to us staying in
discussion.
touch.
Please, we need to stay in touch. I think you've kind of lighted a few bulbs in my head. So be sure we will be following up, and hopefully, we do this again. But certainly, hopefully, we do some work together in this part of the world. And I would love to host you in our facilities and get to know you better in this region. Or next time I'm in the US, I go there frequently.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Analyzing Healthcare. Stay informed and stay inspired. Don't forget to subscribe and visit scale-community.com to become a Scale Community member. Until next time, keep exploring the ideas that shape our healthcare systems.